12 years ago, I stood alone in a cramped apartment, staring at a wedding suit hanging perfectly pressed inside my closet. The fabric was smooth, the buttons polished, the jacket fitted exactly to my shoulders. It was ready for a ceremony that was supposed to take place in just 8 days at Maplewood Hall, the most breathtaking venue in all of Dallas. My fiancée, Emma Davis, had chosen it with certainty. She adored its ivory stone walls, the glittering chandeliers that seemed to glow from within, and the terrace that opened onto a quiet, shimmering lake. It was the sort of place you reserved only if your pockets were deep or your savings untouched. I didn't have either, but I had a steady job, a growing career, and the belief that love could carry us through anything. But that week, everything started slipping apart. It began on a Wednesday morning when my boss, Daniel, called me into his office. The room looked strangely empty, his desk cleared except for a single manila folder placed dead center. He didn't bother easing into it. "Jack," he said, voice clipped, "the investors are withdrawing. We're scaling back 1/3 of the company. I'm sorry, but your role ends today." It felt like someone had knocked the wind out of me. My wedding was only days away. I walked out of the building carrying a cardboard box with my things, a photo frame, a mug, a few files, and tried to ignore the pit forming in my stomach. How was I supposed to tell Emma? We had promised that nothing would break us. I told myself she would say it was just a setback. That night, I called her. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could. "Something happened. The company lost its funding. They let me go today, but I'll find something soon. I've already got leads." There was a long pause. When she finally spoke, her tone was flat, emotionless. "My dad says this changes everything." My chest tightened. "Emma, it's one job. I'll get another. We are still us." She didn't argue, but she didn't comfort me either, and somehow that silence hurt worse than shouting would have. The next evening, she asked me to join her family for dinner. I didn't like the heaviness in her voice, but I went anyway. The moment I stepped into the Davis house, I knew exactly what I was walking into, like stepping before a judge who had already written the verdict. Paul Davis sat rigid at the head of the dining table, swirling amber whiskey in a crystal glass. Laura Davis sat quietly beside him, eyes lowered, avoiding mine. Emma was across from me, tense, hands knotted together on her lap. Paul began speaking before I even sat down. "Jack, I'll be direct," he said, voice cold and sharp. "You're sinking. My daughter will not marry a man who can't offer her the life she deserves." I swallowed hard. "This isn't about money. We love each other. We'll get through this, like every real couple does." He gave a cold half-smile. "Love is for movies and wedding vows. In reality, stability is what matters. Security is what matters. You've lost both." I turned to Emma, searching for the woman who once looked at me like I was her whole world. She avoided my gaze. Not once did she look up. 3 days later, the engagement ended. She didn't even come herself. Her mother showed up at my apartment holding a small velvet box in her hands. Her expression was stiff, rehearsed. "Emma wanted you to have this back," she said, placing the ring in my palm. The engagement ring glimmered under the dim kitchen light, but it felt dead, like the final piece of a dream that had already turned to dust. The venue was canceled. The deposits were lost. My mother, Ruth, called me crying after hearing the news from someone else. My younger brother, Mark, showed up at my door with a six-pack, clapped a hand on my shoulder, and said, "Forget them. One day they'll regret how they treated you." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to pretend I was fine. But the truth was, the humiliation stayed lodged deep inside me. It wasn't only that Emma left, it was the way her family made me feel like my value could be tallied up on a spreadsheet, like I was unworthy the moment a paycheck vanished. Those words haunted me for years. Whenever I worked late, Whenever I stumbled, whenever fear crawled up my spine, their judgment echoed in my mind. And they echoed again last month when I signed the final papers to acquire a mid-sized tech firm. And with it, full control of Davis Manufacturing, Paul Davis's company. I could have kept quiet. I could have taken my victory silently, but I didn't. Instead, I rented Maplewood Hall, the same white stone walls, the same chandeliers dripping with light, the same lakeside terrace that should have witnessed my vows years ago. This time, it was for a celebration marking my company's biggest acquisition to date. The guest list included every powerful figure in the city, and 3 people I invited personally: Paul Davis, Laura Davis, and Emma Davis. The invitations were sent out in embossed gold envelopes. On the back, in small but unmistakable print, were the words, "Hosted by Jack Miller." I knew they wouldn't ignore it. People like the Davises lived for rooms filled with wealth and influence. That night, as I stood at the center of Maplewood Hall in a perfectly tailored black suit, the chandeliers glowing above me, I waited. The tall glass doors opened, and when the 3 of them stepped inside, the expression on Paul's face told me everything. He never expected that I would be the one standing there. 12 years earlier, before that night at Maplewood Hall, my life had been simpler. I was 31, living in a small 1-bedroom in Eastwood. The rent wasn't cheap, but my position as a project manager at a rising tech startup kept me comfortable enough. We were building a cybersecurity platform that had just secured a major contract. I believed we were on the edge of something big, something that could define my future. My daily routine was demanding, but satisfying. I grabbed a coffee from the corner cafe every morning, took the train downtown, and worked 10 to 12-hour days because I believed that every hour mattered. Every Friday, I met Emma at her favorite Italian restaurant. She'd excitedly talk about flower arrangements, fabrics, and color palettes while I listened, pretending I understood anything about chiffon or organza. Emma Davis was striking, the kind of woman who turned heads the second she stepped into any room. She moved with a quiet, polished confidence, and always dressed immaculately, like style was second nature. She was ambitious as well, an MBA grad working in marketing for a luxury brand. She had goals, expectations, standards. Back then, I thought I could meet them all. Her confidence was one of the first things that attracted me. We had met 5 years earlier at a networking event. She was talking to a group of people, laughing about how she didn't understand half the tech terms being thrown around. I introduced myself, cracked a joke about how we probably wouldn't need encryption to talk over dinner, and we've been inseparable ever since. Our backgrounds couldn't have been more different. I was raised by my mother, Ruth, after my father passed away when I was 15. She worked as a school librarian and taught me that hard work and honesty mattered more than anything else. My younger brother, Mark, grew up fixing cars in our uncle's garage and eventually became a mechanic. We didn't have much, but our house was filled with warmth, humor, and a sense of loyalty that didn't break under pressure. Emma, on the other hand, grew up in a sprawling estate in the suburbs. Her father, Paul Davis, owned one of the city's most successful manufacturing companies. He was the kind of man who measured people by their net worth and their usefulness to him. From the start, he made it clear he didn't think I measured up. His wife, Laura, was more polite, but kept her distance, as though she expected things to end eventually. Still, Emma insisted her family would come around. Once they see how happy we are, they'll understand, she told me more than once. I wanted to believe her. When we got engaged, I thought it was proof that love could bridge any gap. I'd saved for months to buy her ring. Nothing as extravagant as the ones her friends flashed on social media, but it was elegant and chosen with care. When I proposed in the park where we'd first walked together, she said yes through tears. The months leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind. Emma had a binder full of swatches and seating charts.
I was in charge of arranging the band and the photographer. My mom was over the moon, telling anyone who would listen about her son marrying a real catch. Mark joked about how he'd better learn how to tie a tie before the big day. Maplewood Hall was Emma's dream venue. She showed me pictures of its grand staircase, the terrace with views of the lake, the crystal chandeliers. It was more than I could afford, but she assured me her parents would handle the cost. I didn't love the idea of taking their money, but I let it go. She was so excited, and I wanted her to have the day she imagined. A week before everything fell apart, we were there for the menu tasting. I remember the sunlight spilling across the marble floors, the smell of roasted herbs from the kitchen. My mom sat next to me, looking like she was taking mental notes for the rest of her life. Mark teased me about whether I'd cry during the vows. At one point, Emma leaned over and whispered, "In 12 years, we'll be laughing about how stressed we were over table centerpieces." I grinned and told her, "As long as it's with you, I'll laugh about anything." That was the last truly carefree moment I remember having with her. Looking back now, I can see the cracks were already there. Paul had been pressuring her to sign a prenuptial agreement. He'd made comments about how the tech industry was unstable, but I brushed it all off, thinking he was just being overprotective. I didn't understand yet how deeply he valued control or how quickly Emma would fold under his influence. At that point, I still believed the only thing that could hurt us was something we faced together. I had no idea that the thing that would destroy us was something I'd have to face alone. The news came on a Wednesday morning that started like any other. I'd taken the train downtown, coffee in hand, ready for another long day at the office. By mid-morning, I was in a meeting about our next product update when the CEO asked me to step outside. His face was pale, and the hallway suddenly felt too quiet. "Jack," he began, avoiding my eyes, "we lost our primary investor overnight. The deal's dead. We're laying off 1/3 of the company. I'm sorry, but your role is one of the ones being cut." The words landed like a punch. I had 8 days until the wedding. My entire life was planned around a stable job and a steady income, and in a single moment, it was gone. I packed my desk in silence, my coworkers watching with the uneasy sympathy of people who know they could be next. On the train ride home, my mind raced with numbers. Savings accounts, bills, the cost of the honeymoon. I told myself I could still fix this. I had skills, connections, and a solid resume. I'd find something fast. That evening, I called Emma. "Something happened today." I told her the company lost its funding. "They had to let me go, but I'm already lining up interviews. This won't last long." There was a pause longer than I expected. "My dad says this changes everything," she said. Finally, "It's just a job," I replied. "We'll get through it together." She didn't answer. And the silence told me more than words. The next day, she asked me to come to her parents' house for dinner. I hoped it was so they could offer support, maybe some reassurance. Instead, it felt like walking into an ambush. The Davis dining room was as imposing as its owner, a long mahogany table stretched beneath a chandelier, silverware gleaming under the light. Paul Davis sat at the head, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Laura sat quietly beside him, her posture perfect, her face unreadable. Emma was across from me, eyes down. Paul didn't waste time. "Jack, I'll speak plainly. You're a sinking ship. My daughter will not marry a man who can't provide the life she deserves." I met his gaze. "This isn't about money. It's about love. We've been planning a future together, and that hasn't changed." He smirked like I was a child who didn't understand how the world worked. "Love is a luxury. Stability is a necessity, and you've just lost it." I turned to Emma. Tell him this doesn't matter." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know, Jack. Maybe we should wait until things settle." The rest of the dinner was a blur. I left feeling like I'd been tried, judged, and sentenced in under an hour. 3 days later, I got my answer. It came not from Emma, but from her mother. She showed up at my apartment holding the velvet ring box I'd given Emma. She asked me to return this. Laura said softly, "It's for the best." I stood there in the doorway, the box in my palm cold and heavier than it should have been. The wedding was called off. Maplewood Hall was canceled. My phone buzzed with sympathetic texts from friends who'd heard, each one a reminder of how public my humiliation had become. My mother called as soon as she found out. "You come here for dinner tonight," she said. "We'll get through this." Her voice cracked, and I knew she was holding back her anger for my sake. Mark showed up at my door with a six-pack. "They're wrong about you," he said. "One day, you're going to show them exactly who they threw away." For the first few weeks, I felt like I was walking in a fog. I'd wake up in the middle of the night replaying the last conversation with Emma, trying to pinpoint the moment she decided I wasn't worth the risk. I wondered if she'd ever really believed in us, or if she'd just been waiting for a reason to leave. What made it worse was the echo of Paul's words, a sinking ship. I heard them every time I checked my dwindling bank account or scrolled past a job listing that didn't pay half of what I used to make. The embarrassment followed me everywhere. Friends tried to set me up with new people, but I wasn't ready. I avoided certain parts of the city because I didn't want to risk running into Emma or her family. I started working odd jobs, anything to keep the bills paid while I searched for a way back into the tech industry. The breakup didn't just take my relationship. It shattered my sense of stability. But under all the hurt, something else began to grow. A determination I hadn't felt before. If Paul thought I was a sinking ship, I was going to prove I was an entire fleet. That thought became the ember I carried with me into every job application, every freelance gig, every long night teaching myself new programming languages. I wasn't just trying to survive anymore. I was building something bigger than I'd ever imagined. The weeks after the wedding was called off were the lowest I had ever known. I woke up every morning to silence, the kind that presses down on you and makes it hard to move. My suit, the one I'd planned to wear at Maplewood Hall, still hung in the closet. I couldn't bring myself to take it down. Every time I opened the door, it stared back at me like a reminder of everything I'd lost. At first, I took whatever work I could find. Data entry for a temp agency, part-time IT support at a local community center, the occasional website repair for a friend's small business. None of it paid well, but it kept me afloat. My mother worried constantly. "You can't live on scraps forever, Jack," she said one night over dinner. "You're worth more than this." Mark had his own way of pushing me forward. One Saturday afternoon, we were in his garage while he worked on a beat-up pickup. "You want to prove them wrong?" he said, not looking up from the engine. "Then stop living like you've already lost. They think you're a sinking ship. Build yourself into a fleet." That thought clicked. I'd been drifting, reacting to whatever life threw at me, instead of steering my own course. If I wanted a future that wasn't defined by the Davises' judgment, I needed to create it myself. That Monday, I walked into a small computer repair shop near my apartment and asked if they were hiring. The owner, a man named Pyle, told me he needed someone to handle coding jobs he didn't have time for. The pay was barely above minimum wage, but I took it. I treated every project like it was worth 10 times more than it paid. At night, I taught myself new programming languages, Python, JavaScript, SQL. I took online cybersecurity courses, devoured business books, and reached out to people I'd met in my old job, letting them know I was available for freelance work. Slowly, I built a small client list. 3 years passed before I felt the shift. I was no longer scrambling to survive. I was choosing my projects, charging what I knew my time was worth. One of those projects turned into a partnership. A client who ran a logistics firm asked if I'd be interested in co-developing a custom security platform. We worked out of his basement, at first splitting profits evenly. Within a year, that platform was attracting interest from other companies. We registered a business, Miller & Owen Technologies. It was small, just the two of us, but we had a product people wanted. I handled development and client acquisition, while my partner focused on operations.
We reinvested every dollar into growth. There were weeks I barely slept, running on coffee and determination, but I could feel momentum building. By the 7th year, we had a team of 16 and contracts with several mid-sized corporations. I started attending industry conferences, not just as a guest, but as a speaker. My name was becoming known in the cybersecurity field. I didn't talk about my past, but privately, I kept a mental scoreboard. Every new client, every new hire, every profitable quarter was another point in my favor against the Davises. Then came the opportunity that changed everything. A larger tech firm, Cybercore, was looking to expand its security division. They approached us with an acquisition offer, one that would keep me on as head of the department with full creative control. It was more money than I had ever imagined earning, and it came with access to resources that could take our innovations to the next level. I accepted. 3 years into my role at Cybercore, I was asked to lead negotiations for a strategic acquisition. The target was a struggling manufacturing company that had valuable patents but poor management. The name on the briefing packet stopped me cold. Davis Manufacturing. Paul's company. I flipped through the details. They'd been acquired by another mid-sized tech firm years earlier, but that firm was now under Cybercore's umbrella, which meant if the deal went through, I would have the final say over Davis Manufacturing's future. I didn't rush. I wanted it done right. The acquisition took months of negotiation, but when the final signatures were in place, it was official. I was now in control of the company Paul had built his reputation on. I could have kept it quiet, let the victory be mine alone, but I thought back to the night in his dining room, the smug certainty in his voice when he called me a sinking ship. I remembered Emma's downcast eyes, the way she let him speak for her. This wasn't about spite. It was about closure. So I booked Maplewood Hall, the chandeliers, the terrace, the same grand staircase that was supposed to be part of my wedding day. Only now, it would be the site of a celebration marking the biggest professional triumph of my life. I made the guest list myself, ensuring every major business leader in the city would be there. And right in the middle of that list were 3 names: Davis, Laura Davis, and Emma Davis. The invitations were embossed, formal, and impossible to ignore. On the back, in small black print, it read, "Hosted by Jack Miller." Mark grinned when he saw them. "You're not just a fleet, you're an entire navy." The night of the celebration at Maplewood Hall was clear and crisp, the kind of October evening that made the city feel alive. The venue glowed from the inside out, chandeliers casting warm light through tall glass windows. Guests in tailored suits and glittering dresses drifted across the marble floor, glasses of champagne in hand, their voices mingling into a hum of wealth and influence. I arrived early, wanting to take in the room before the chaos began. The staircase, where I had once imagined Emma walking down in her wedding gown, now stood as the centerpiece of the evening, lined with fresh flowers. The terrace doors were open, letting in the scent of autumn air. Everything looked exactly as it had in my memories. But now, the event was mine. I was no longer a guest in someone else's world. I was the host. My team moved through the crowd, introducing themselves to potential partners, answering questions about the acquisition. I shook hands, posed for photographs, and made polite conversation. But my attention was fixed on the front entrance. When the Davises arrived, the atmosphere shifted. Paul walked in first,
wearing a dark gray suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. His stride was confident, but the moment his eyes found me, he froze for half a second before recovering. Laura followed, her expression polite but tight. And then came Emma. She looked almost exactly as she had a decade ago, though there was something sharper in her features now, a slight tension in her smile. I crossed the room to greet them, each step deliberate. "Paul, Laura, Emma, I'm glad you could make it." Paul's voice was controlled. "We were surprised to see your name on the invitation." "I thought you might be," I replied. "After all, it's not every day a man buys the company that defined another man's career." A flicker passed through his eyes, quickly hidden. "Business changes hands all the time." "True," I said, keeping my tone even, "but some transactions mean more than others." Ali gave a polite smile, as if hoping to diffuse the tension. "This is a beautiful event." "Thank you. I wanted it to be memorable," I said, "especially for certain guests." Emma finally spoke, her voice quieter than I remembered. "You've done well for yourself." I met her gaze. "I have, and I hope you found what you were looking for." She looked away first. As the evening went on, I made sure they saw everything. The slideshow of our company's milestones projected against the wall, the conversations I had with other executives who spoke to me with respect, the speeches from my team about our future plans. Every moment was a reminder that I was not the man they had once dismissed.
Halfway through the night, I took the microphone to address the crowd. The room fell silent. 12 years ago, I began. I stood in this very hall with the expectation of starting a new chapter in my life. That chapter never began. I was told I was a sinking ship. I was told I didn't have the stability or the value to build a future worth sharing. Tonight, I stand here not to prove anyone wrong, but to show what is possible when you refuse to let someone else define your worth. I didn't name the Davises, but the pause I allowed afterward was enough for the implication to sink in. I saw Paul's jaw tighten, Laura shift in her chair, and Emma's hands clasp in her lap. After the applause, I stepped down and moved through the crowd. People stopped me to shake my hand, congratulate me, ask about upcoming projects. The Davises stayed for another half hour, speaking little. I caught Paul watching me from across the room, more than once, his expression unreadable. As they prepared to leave, Paul approached. "You've built something impressive," he said, his voice measured. "I built it because I believed in myself," I answered, "even when others didn't." He gave a slow nod, as if conceding a point he didn't want to admit. Laura offered a polite goodbye. Emma hesitated, then stepped closer. "I was wrong," she said softly. "About you. About everything." I looked at her, remembering the man I had been when she left. The man who would have given anything for her to stay. That man was gone.
I stood in the lobby for a moment, taking in the same white stone walls, the same chandeliers. It no longer felt like the site of a loss. It felt like just another place in the city, one I had long since reclaimed in my mind. As I left, I thought about what I would say to the man I was 12 years ago, standing in his small apartment with a suit in the closet and his life falling apart. I would tell him this: you will not only survive this, you will thrive. And one day, you'll stand in the very place where you thought your life ended, and you will smile, because it was only the beginning. When I got home that night,
I poured a glass of wine, sat on my balcony, and watched the city lights. I felt no bitterness, no lingering need for revenge. What I felt was peace, the kind that comes from knowing you have nothing left to prove. For me, the real victory wasn't in owning Paul's company or standing in Maplewood Hall surrounded by power. It was in building a life that was mine alone, shaped by my choices, my work, and my resilience. Sometimes the best way to answer those who doubt you isn't with words. It's with the life you build in spite of them. That's my story. If you've ever been told you weren't enough, I hope this reminds you that your value isn't defined by someone else's opinion. You have the power to rebuild, to rise higher than anyone expected, and to create a life you're proud of. If you connected with this story, make sure to like the video, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. Your support means everything. It's how we keep sharing stories that inspire and empower.